Welcome, welcome. This is Kim Addis from Frame of Mind Coaching, and I am the host of Resilience Radio, where I interview professionals who are experts at crushing the tough stuff. Before I introduce my guest, I want to give you a journaling question of the week. Think about a challenging experience, a bad injury, a conflict, an experience where you had an accident, a failure, or a negative outcome, or even an interaction with someone who was even a little rough or abusive with you. How did you recover from that experience? Think about how long ago it was and think about if it still affects you today. Journal about that and send it my way. My email address is kim@frameofmindcoaching.com. Today, it is my tremendous pleasure to introduce our new guest, Rachel Grant. Rachel is the owner and founder of a coaching company called Rachel Grant Coaching. And her specialty is that she's a sexual abuse recovery coach. She wrote a book called Beyond Surviving. And really, the focus of that book is to help people really go through the final stages of recovery from sexual abuse. Rachel, are you there?
I am so here, Kim.
Awesome. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
So you are a coach, you're not a therapist, and there's a distinction there somewhere from the standpoint of helping people who are continuing to experience trauma or negative impact from sexual abuse. And I'm curious about that. Maybe we can start with explaining the difference right there.
For sure. Yeah, around when I decided to do my master's in counseling psychology, I really went into that graduate program from the perspective of going on to do my licensing and becoming a marriage and family therapist. And as I was doing my coursework and I was talking to my professors and, really looking at the lay of the land, a couple of things came up for me that really changed my mind about becoming a therapist. And one of the biggest things for me was the distinction between, am I working with someone from the place of diagnosing? Am I working with someone from the place of kind of holding space for them and letting the client really guide the conversation, really bring in and be kind of the author? Or am I more interested in working with someone in a more action-oriented kind of a way, and less about diagnosing, really less about even talking about the past, and much more in the world of what are we going to do about all of these things that are on your plate as a result of having experienced childhood sexual abuse. And I just found that I didn't want the limitations that come along with therapy in the sense of being only able to work with people in my area. Some of that's changing now with teletherapy, but back when I was, doing this and it was my time to decide, that wasn't as much of a thing. And I really like the idea of coaching giving me the opportunity to work with people virtually, work with them by phone, by Skype, from all around the country and the world, because one of the things that I know is that a lot of survivors of sexual abuse are in areas where they don't have resources. And so for someone to be able to pick up their phone and get on the call with me, that was really appealing as well.
So let me see if I got it. So you were interested in helping mobilize people into action. Did I get that right?
Yeah, I think that's a big piece of it, for sure.
Okay, really, really interesting. And so maybe you can give me an example. So give me an example of a client that you may have or have had who is struggling and stuck, and you help move them to a better place with a specific plan of action. Like, I'm really very, very interested in this from a coaching standpoint because my clients aren't sexual abuse victims. My clients are the highly driven population who have achieved some measure of success. So this is a whole different ball of wax for me. I'm really fascinated by your process.
Well, when I experienced sexual abuse myself at the age of 10 by my grandfather, that, it set me on a path for sure. And much of my life was really spent in trying to pretend and run away from and just, kind of cope and manage and get by. But when I was in my mid-20s, I was coming out of a 10-year relationship that was extremely abusive. And I really had this moment, Kim, of sitting with myself and wondering, what's going to have to change in order for my life to change? Because I was very clear that unless something shifted like very quickly, I was going to be spending the rest of my life pretty miserable. And so I became very obsessed with trying to answer this question. I became almost singularly focused with trying to answer this question of how do I heal from sexual abuse? And my background is also in education. I worked as a preschool teacher, an elementary school teacher for many years. So my way of thinking has always been kind of curriculum based. And so I decided to try to tackle this question that often feels very kind of wiggly and spaghetti-like, like there's all these different things that you've got to sort through, and where do I start, and what if I can apply some structure to that? And so I began really using myself as a guinea pig and trying different things based on what I was learning in my master's in counseling program, just studying and reading everything that I possibly could, began to study neuroscience. So bit by bit, this all came into a structure and a curriculum. And that's one of the things that people are sometimes surprised by, because they have this sense of, well, don't you just work with, like if the person is upset or having a hard time with, trusting other people, shouldn't you just support them around that and start there, which is kind of the therapeutic model.
Right.
But what I was finding in my own experience in therapy and also in talking with people was that this at some point becomes counterproductive. And so that is why there's a curriculum and a step-by-step model that we follow in the Beyond Surviving program.
Say more about the counterproductivity.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why that's counterproductive is because when you have somebody who is in their stories, are in their kind of trauma loops, there's a stage in the healing where just being able to name and talk about what happened and explore that, make some connections. Oh, that's why I have a hard time trusting. Oh, that's why I'm so easily triggered by X, Y, or Z. There's kind of this beautiful safe space that therapy provides that is of high value for survivors. However, there's also the potential of getting stuck there and just kind of going in and rehearsing your trauma over and over again.
So reliving it.
Yeah.
And defining yourself by it.
Exactly. And on a neurological and nervous system level, that actually at a certain point becomes counterproductive. It causes the brain to deepen those associations if we're not doing any intervention work and counterbalancing that.
Okay.
So most people who come to me are really at that place in their journey, Kim, where they've done therapy, they've done groups, they've read the books, they're very book smart about trauma, right? They know all the phrases, the PTSD and trigger and all this stuff, and they even have a really good sense of why they're stuck or where they're stuck. And they're really struggling with the how do I get out of this loop? How do I change these patterns? And so I'll give you an example. One of my clients came to me, and I work with both men and women, and he said, Rachel, I know you have this whole part in your program where you work on relationship skills, but I think I'd like to skip that part. I said, oh, really? What's that all about? Tell me more. And he says, I think I'm just destined to be single. It just never works out for me. It's never going to happen. And, that was just one of those places of knowing and being with someone who's just been so hurt and so let down and is so entrenched in the beliefs that, he had about himself and relationships and sex and love. And so, I said, well, let's just cross that bridge when we get there. But that is also why I'm one of the things that I love about my program, because even though I knew that that was a pain point for him, we could set it off. We don't cover relationship stuff until like month 7 out of 8. And we were doing all of this retraining his system, retraining the brain, letting go of shame and guilt, learning to be able, actually giving him space to express and tell his story. And when we had done all of that work and other things too, and we came to the lesson on, okay, this is where we turn the corner and we start to look at things like trust, he was ready and he was open. And now he's married, and they just had their first baby this year.
Nice. So tell me about the process. It's an 8-month process, and what happens in those 8 months? You said that you have curriculum. We seem to have a bit in common, I think. But go ahead, tell me.
Well, so the program is 8 months if you're working with me one-on-one, 4 months if you're working with me in a group, so it's a little more accelerated, but the curriculum is the same. And we make our way through using the Beyond Surviving Guidebook as our foundation and, our roadmap, if you will, for working through the modules and the lessons. So my clients are reading lessons, doing reflection work, listening to audio trainings, and then coming to their sessions with all of that foundation. And I'm adding in coaching and additional exercises that bring it all up a notch.
Mm-hmm. So how do they do their reflection?
It's all in the guidebook, so they can write it out in the guidebook,
so it's like journaling.
Or to journal. Yeah, there are very, very specific questions that are prompting them to think about very specific things. Perfect. Just like I loved how you started your podcast here with those little prompts. Beautiful. Same idea. Yeah, that's right. So in the Beyond Surviving world, we always start with healing the nervous system and beginning to understand how to take charge of the brain. So we do a boot camp for the brain as the very first place where we start. That's all about understanding the impact of trauma on the brain. And, for me, Kim, this was, I think, one of the most pivotal turning points in my own healing, because I began to understand that my experience was not unique in the sense that trauma impacts the brain in almost the very same way for almost every single person. There are some nuances and differences, but I began to get this sense that, this is like an injury to my brain. And so what do I do to heal an injury? Just like we have steps and protocols to heal like a broken bone.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe there are steps and protocol that we can use to heal the brain. And so I really start with that work with my clients for many reasons, but one of the most critical ones is until we have a sense that we can manage our emotions, that if we start to feel triggered or activated, that we can intervene on our own behalves on that, and that we begin to counter all of that impact and get our nervous system regulated, it's actually really hard and can even be re-traumatizing to try to delve into other topics or other areas.
So how could somebody manage themselves when they're in the middle of, let's call it an anxiety attack?
Sure. So the main thing to understand about anxiety attacks is that what's happening is that your limbic system has been activated. So this is the part of your brain that has the amygdala and the hippocampus and the thalamus. And so I like to think of the thalamus as like the bouncer of your brain. And so it's like standing at the gate.
Like a bar bouncer?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Okay. Kind of standing at the gate and deciding, like, do you get in? And if you do get in, are you going to be a problem here, or are you not going to be a problem here? Mm-hmm. And so for a lot of survivors of abuse and trauma, the thalamus actually becomes very wary of everything. So everything could be a potential threat, which is why a lot of times survivors of abuse experience high activation, are always kind of in this on switch place, always a little bit anxious, on alert, on the guard. And so when that information gets sent to the amygdala and the amygdala says, we're in danger, this kind of looks like or sounds like or feels like or smells like something that happened in my past that was damaging or hard or painful, well, then I better get us into action and do something to protect us from that happening again. And so the amygdala floods the system. It has thousands of pathways in order to send its signal out to the brain and get somebody to do something, whether that's fight, run away, dissociate so that you can survive the experience. So one of the things that we want to learn how to do is, first of all, get the thalamus to chill out and be like, okay, not everything is a threat. And part of that is through exposure. And then the other thing is when we're having the amygdala is flooding the system, how to interrupt that process. Okay, so there are somatic things that we can do, like connecting back with our breath, actually physically moving our body, like shaking, like jumping up and down. You can rub your palms together, and this is a way of getting the left brain and the right brain of your body to talk to each other, and that also can be deactivating. In my program, we use a couple of strategies that are language-based. So, for example, if you ask a question like, what did I have for breakfast? And you answer that question, it's something that you don't immediately know the answer to. Where did I go for dinner last Friday? Who won, the Super Bowl in 2010?
Yeah.
It can be any kind of question, but what happens as soon as you ask that question, it's like you're putting a dam in front of the amygdala's signal. And you're allowing parts of your brain,
So it's
like
kind of like a redirect.
It's a redirect, but it's the interruption piece, because during that interruption, it allows your hippocampus, your prefrontal cortex, your Broca's area, which controls speech, all of these parts of the brain that go kind of, I'm going to say offline, that's just for ease of understanding, that's not exactly what's going on, but all of those parts of the brain kind of go offline. And so when we ask a question and respond to a question that is neutral, there's no charge to it, there's no energy to it, then the prefrontal cortex comes back, the hippocampus comes back, and the Broca's area comes back. Because the main thing that's happening when we're having a panic attack is we're losing all sense of where we are. We think that something that was dangerous and bad that happened back then is about to happen or is happening right now. And so the more we can interrupt that signal and bring the parts of our brain back online that help us think rationally, help us calm down, help us understand where we are in space and time, then that we can minimize the impact or the duration of a panic attack.
So go back to that client who didn't want to talk about relationships, and now he's married. How did you get him over that hump?
So sometimes I think magic.
I understand that.
Right?
Yeah.
But sometimes
I'll tell you what we call it. We call it FOM, for frame of mind, voodoo.
Yeah.
That's what we call it. We call
it
voodoo. Yeah.
Because it's kind of like, I sometimes think of it like baking a cake. If you put things in the cake in a certain order, you get this beautiful, yummy cake. It's almost like without fail. Once you get the recipe down, it's like, okay, I just do this, this, and this, and I get cake. And I think over the past 11 years that I've been, working with this population, of course, it's my own journey too, me healing my life and figuring out how to move past this place of always needing to cope and manage and struggling with the pain of those experiences, that it's almost like the program does a lot of the work for me at this point. And if I take someone who's experienced trauma and I have them do this, 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 and this, while also being their guide, being their cheerleader, helping them when they're scared, right? That's a big piece of my job, really, is, and I think probably for many coaches, it's when the person doesn't believe in themselves, you holding the belief for them.
Right.
And continuing to encourage them and move obstacles that come from a place of fear, that come from a place of history, out of their way so they can keep applying the magic or the voodoo. And then, they arrive in this place almost very seamlessly and naturally. It's not that there aren't challenges and work to be done.
Yep. So go back, and I'm really interested in the whole idea of action plan. So what actions might you ask a client to take to kind of say, okay, like it's time for us to take a sharp right turn and move past this hold it has on your life?
Well, one of the very first things that I always ask of my clients is that they believe that they can heal. That for me is a stepping off point, and we do work to make sure that there is going to be the skeptic, there is going to be the critic, there's going to be the doubter that says, this isn't going to change, I've always been this way, why is this going to be any different, all of those sorts of fears, I don't even deserve this. And so we've got to minimize that enough so that the other part of them, the hope part of them, outweighs anything else. And then, and throughout the 8 months or 4 months, there can be a little bit of a teeter-totter action with that. But really focusing on believing that they can heal is such an important first step in this kind of healing work. From there, we really focus in on integrity. We do a lot of work around alignment because I think one of the things that is most stolen as a result of sexual abuse trauma is our sense of trusting ourselves, our sense of choice, our sense of power. And so much of the exercises and the lessons and the tools are about restoring that. So we start with things that seem almost like, how does that relate or how does that even connect in? But integrity, being in alignment with our words, saying what we mean and meaning what we say, is actually super critical. Because for most survivors of sexual abuse, we've lost that connection because we've had to use language to lie, to hide, to cover up, to conceal, to pretend, no, I'm fine. I'm really fine. You know, I'm just tired. I didn't get enough sleep last night, right? All of those sorts of things. And so that creates this disconnect between our authentic self, like what we're actually feeling and experiencing, and what we're putting out in the world.
So you're teaching people to be brutally honest.
Yes. You know, and
Interesting.
I sometimes think of this journey as having two sides to a coin. Like, one piece of this really is about, let's look at this past trauma, let's understand it, let's heal it, let's release it. But another side of this coin is really teaching people life skills, skills that were missed because they were in the midst of trauma and abuse. So how do I understand, how do I even know what I need, right? How do I connect with that? And then once, if I do connect with what I need, how do I express that, right? How do I communicate that? Yeah.
So I'm really interested. How do you find your clients? Because, you know, for me, entrepreneurs gather, they show up, they're proud of their, you know, their history, their success. In your case, I'm imagining a lot of sexual abuse survivors hide out. How do you find them?
Well, that was, one of the things that I found to be really of benefit in working virtually is that it drops some barrier to entry. I don't have to drive somewhere. I don't have to sit across from someone and manage my responses to their body language, to their posture, to their facial expressions. So when I very first started this work in 2007, and then I think by 2010 it was really becoming more refined and I was really more actively looking for clients, I had a mentor coach and she says, Rachel, work by phone. And I thought, that's crazy. How's that going to, this is, whatever. But I've really actually found it to be one of the benefits. And so people can find me at this point in my business lots of different ways. They come to me by way of my Healing from Sexual Abuse Facebook group, which has over 4,500 members.
So people find you.
Yeah, people find me. And that's the thing, people are on their computers typing in when they're in pain, when they're hurting, they're going to be Googling, right? Sexual abuse healing, sexual abuse this. So I have a blog, I have a podcast, I've really built up different channels and pathways for people to, first of all, get to know me in a casual way and in their own time, in their own pacing. And then there are very specific ways they can reach out and connect with me and enroll in the program.
Okay, so we're going to take a sharp right turn here. I'm interested in your business model. So you're one person, you're a coach, and one of the things you want to do is grow your company. Yes?
No?
No?
It's such an interesting question. I'm actually in that right now. The question of what does this company look like in the next, 5 to 10 years. And my business model is that, clients come to me. They have the opportunity to work with me one-on-one. They can work with me in groups. There's also a foundations program that they can do that's a completely online course, and that's a pay what you can program. So it's sliding scale. In my group program this year, I've hired my first Beyond Surviving coach. So this person she's one of my early clients who went through the program and graduated, and now she's gone on and been doing her life, and she just finished her LCSW licensing. And so she does some coaching with my group members. So I'm dipping my toe into that world of like, okay, what might it look like to have people also supporting me and doing the work? It's kind of, for me, Kim, the question is, there are two questions. It's really, what do I want my business to look like? And what do I want my impact to look like?
Mm.
And those feel like very different things. And I think I could have a small business with a big impact because I don't know that I want to
I don't
grow.
know if they're different questions. I think they're the same question, because once you decide what your impact is, then you decide what your business needs to look like. So
Yeah.
you and I are similar. In fact, so similar that one of our training modules is called Foundations too. So very
Nice.
interesting. But years and years and years ago, I found myself in your shoes. Like, I was one person, I was doing group coaching, individual coaching, and I was responsible for the whole business, right? Like, I had to generate leads and sales and deliver and create curriculum and the whole thing, the whole 9 yards. What happened with me is, one of the people I coached years and years and years ago went through a one-on-one coaching experience, and at the end of it, he said, okay, I want more. What's next? And I didn't really have like the next, right? I didn't have a next program. And I said, well, are you interested in learning how to coach? And he said, yes. I said, okay, so come and, you'll co-coach the next group with me. And he ended up learning how to coach, and he is still with me, I don't know, 13 years later, as one of my most senior coaches. And what I've done from there is I actually created a certification program, and only people who have gone through coaching with me are invited to get certified in what we call the frame of mind coaching method. So it sounds like you're going down a very similar path. But I had to ask myself the very same questions. Was, not only what do I want my impact to be, but what do I want my life to look like?
Exactly.
Because I found myself tired, right? You can't do everything as a human being, and you have human capacity limitations. So how do I reach more people without it having to be me? And I started to see that not only did people transform through getting coached, but when they became a coach, they were... It was like a miracle happened before me. They took on the concepts, like they completely internalized the material at a whole other level, because now they were teaching it to others, right? So that learning to coach was a step along their own personal development journey beyond, okay, now I get to coach others, right? It was really this tremendous transformational experience at a whole other level. So, you're building your business. I'm building my business. I still have questions about, how do I continue to grow? How do I not be the bottleneck in my own company? How do we touch more people, reach more people, have more impact in a way that is not dependent on Kim? And it sounds like you're going through a very similar series of questions.
Very much so. Very much so. Yeah, because I think there's this interesting dynamic of, what's been on my mind. It's the investigation point. I don't know if it's true or not true at this moment, but it's one of the questions on my mind is, how involved do I get to continue to be with clients? And I've seen enough models where, as you expand and you build a team, your work becomes about managing your team and not about working with clients. And I'm like, I need to find some people who are actually have a balance in that, because I haven't yet. And so,
well, maybe you and I can talk after, and I can share how that looks in my world.
I think that sounds right.
Because the last thing I do is manage people, just so you know.
Yeah.
It's the last thing I do. In fact, philosophically, it's not what I want to do or how I want to spend my time. It's not how I train or coach my leaders, my clients. I don't want them to spend time managing anybody other than themselves. So we can talk about that. Absolutely. What do you think is your current biggest challenge, personally or professionally?
Let's see. Well, right now I'm in the space of creating some new programs for my graduates. So right now, when someone completes the Beyond Surviving program, they can continue to work with me as a graduate one-on-one. But recently I've had a little bit of clamoring from my clients about, can there be a group graduate program? So I've been putting the nuts and bolts of that together. And, I'm sure you're familiar with this, like when you're building a new program, when you're putting in new systems, it's, this is big thing. And it seems like, oh, just, put some things on the calendar and you're done. And so really thinking about how to make that program successful and beneficial for my graduates is the thing that's most immediately on my mind. From there, I'm thinking about, just some bigger questions. How do we start to impact, the ACE study that's been just now, it's been around for so long, but it's just now starting to gain some steam. I don't know if you're familiar with the ACE study.
Tell our audience what the ACE study is about.
So the ACE study was developed by Vincent Felitti back in the day. I won't go into a lot of the history or details, but basically what you need to know is that it's a questionnaire that helps to identify adverse childhood experiences. And what they've found is that the higher your score is, the more ACEs you have, the higher the correlation there is between things like suicidality, diseases, various things. And so Nadine Burke Harris here in San Francisco she's developed a youth wellness center, and she's been working on making the ACE questionnaire with some adaptations that she's bringing in a part of the screening process for all of her patients. Mm-hmm. And so while I work very specifically with men and women who've experienced childhood sexual abuse, I also have these, ideas about how to get involved in these broader conversations that are happening. Of course, the Me Too movement, these sorts of things. So I just think, part of my personal challenge is trying to figure out what to prioritize.
Right.
Right. Oh, I want to do that. Oh, yeah, I want to have some influence there. Right. Oh, I can help out with that. And so finding, which thing is my best next step and where to put that energy and time is certainly up for me right now.
Okay, so here we go. You have a coach on the line. You're used to being the coach yourself, but you have a coach on the line. Is there a question you have for this particular coach?
Yeah, so as coaches, we're business owners, we're entrepreneurs, and one of the things that I would love to ask is, how do you navigate or emotionally work with or manage the ebb and flow of business? It's never just like a straight shot up. You have lean months, or you might even have lean years, or sometimes you have this flood of clients, and then it's like crickets, and it doesn't feel like that ever stops.
Well, I'll tell you, I'll answer it personally as opposed to from a coaching perspective. So there are lots of ways that I would personally answer that. And given we're in the same basic industry, perhaps it has a lot of relevance. For starters, I never thought of my coaching business as a practice, right? It's not a practice, it's a business. I'm not practicing coaching. I'm in the business of coaching. And so being business-minded was super important, because I knew that if I was not business-minded, then I would always be kind of dabbling. So the first thing was my mindset. How do I think about what I'm doing? And then the second, I'm jumping around here. The second part is, okay, so if I'm in the business of coaching, I need to create a forecastable flow of business, right? So I need to plan in advance. I need to project. I can't be working 1 month at a time. I have to look at the year and say, okay, what can I expect to happen this year? And how do I ensure that those things happen? So for me personally, like, how do we get leads? How do we get people to know about us and hear about us? I do speaking engagements. I go out there. So if I look at my calendar, I know, okay, so I have, let's say, 6 speaking engagements in November, 3 in December, 2 in January, etc. So I can start to forecast, and I can start to see my lean periods and say, okay, how do we address that lean time? What can we offer to whom? How do we get an extra speaking engagement? Or how can we work with an existing client to give them some extra service? Or how can we tap into our existing clients and say, hey, are there any people you know that would benefit from coaching? So it's to really look at a year-long projected plan and get a broader picture of what we're doing and when, and how we can expect that to impact our revenue. So those are some of the ways. the last thing that I want to share is that for me personally, like I've been an entrepreneur ever since I was a kid. I was that kid who used to go to Cape Cod with my family and the friends of my family and the friends of their friends. And, I was 10, 11 years old and I'd sell massages on the beach and I'd earn, $2 for 10 minutes or whatever it was. At the time, it was a great living. But I always had that entrepreneurial spirit. And so for me, were there times over the past 14 years where I thought, man, this month is hard, this year is hard, sure. But I never for a minute considered anything else because I'm not wired to work for anybody else. I just can't do that. And so, even thinking about what else can I do, there's nothing else I'd want to do. There's just nothing else. So I just keep at it. So there's this idea of keeping my head down in a way and just continuing, right? So like when you eliminate all other options, you make sure that this one works, right? So, so that has been my approach on a personal level. So, those three kind of strategies. The other thing is, and I just want to say this, and this was from the get-go, from the very beginning of when I started this company, I hired somebody. Even if it was part-time, half a day, every day, I hired somebody and I paid them. Why? Because when somebody else shows up, you have to show up. And what that means is you're working more consistently. Your productivity is higher. Your results are higher. Even if you're hiring a co-op student and you're not paying them anything, but you're making them show up at your office every day, you're changing the game and you're moving from like a one-person coaching system to an operation. And that really makes a massive difference.
Nice. Wow. Beautiful. Thank you, Kim.
So I hope
always
those
nice
ideas
to hear
help.
Different perspectives. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. So, Rachel, it was really, really interesting to hear your story. If you had a piece of advice for anybody who is going through continued trauma at this stage of their lives after experiencing sexual abuse as a child, what would you recommend? Other than we're going to tell people how to find you, but what would you recommend?
For me, the most important first step is to figure out where you are in this healing journey. So understanding that stage, and it's not necessarily linear, but there are milestones in recovery. And then making sure that the type of support that you're getting is in alignment with that is so critical. That's how we can avoid wasting our time, being re-traumatized. But the most important thing for you to know is that this is not a life sentence. Even if you feel like it's been this way forever, it's never going to change, I promise you, it's not a life sentence. There are very practical, doable things that you can do to heal from this, and you do not have to spend your life in the pain that results from somebody else's choices.
Amazing. Thank you so much. If people want to find you, how do they find you?
Please come visit me at rachelgrantcoaching.com, and you'll see at the bottom of that a checklist that you can download that will help you do just what I was talking about, figure out where you are and the kind of support to look for and the goals of recovery. And so check that out, and please do not hesitate, reach out. I have lots of free resources on the site. Of course, there's the opportunity to work with me in the program as well, but whatever I can do to be of a support, I'm absolutely here for you.
Awesome. And if anyone is interested in learning more about Frame of Mind Coaching, go to frameofmindcoaching.com. On the site, there is a complimentary coaching call. Bring a problem, an area of stress, an area of tension to the call, and allow one of our incredible team members to help you through it. Again, that's frameofmindcoaching.com. Rachel, thank you.
Thank you, Kim.